I have chills. What a way to kick it off, and what an incredible story. I was rereading the collection, and I'm completely in love with it. And also to take a step back, it's an honor to be in dialogue with Olga and to be here. Thank you everyone for coming. And thank you Palo Alto Library and Cynthia, thank you so much for having us here. So thank you for diving in and sharing your story. And in conversation, you've mentioned magic, the future and the past and the present. Okay, it's all in flux. Okay. You mentioned, you said something that was as cold water in my face as the way you ended the story, which is that someone's nightmares can also be a place of joy. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, this came out from my hesitation to read the story because of the way it ends. It ends on a very, very dark note, and but it is a first story, and it does cover many of the themes in the collection. So it's a good introduction to my work and what's in the book. The whole nightmares thing, I was thinking a lot about how in the and I don't know what culture is responsible for this, or if it's several cultures. Is it Russian? Is it like generally Soviet? Is it Jewish? I don't know what contributed to this extreme fear of the evil eye, or like people, like if you say something negative, or if you say something, if you express a fear, you will make it into being. It will come to be. So, like in an extreme example of this, I have a friend in Russia, a very close friend, one of my best friends from childhood, who did not tell me that she was pregnant, but on a visit, I came to her house. I went back home and I came to her house, and there she was with a baby. She couldn't tell me about it because of this fear of speaking. Either it's something bad or it's something very good, but anything that's really emotionally charged, it's you don't speak about it, you don't write about it, you just keep it to yourself. And so when I write these stories, sometimes I'm conscious of working with these superstitions, and as a result, sometimes I get very interesting responses, but people do respond. There's a lot of stories in the book about early childhood experience, or parenthood experience, and I think people often are surprised that, oh, you wrote about that. but I think but it is useful, I think, to share that. It does, but when it is shared, it sometimes can feel like a joy.
Yeah, I love that, and admire your courage, and also it's naming it and giving permission to speak out about all kinds of topics, which you do in your book, putting it out in the open, and I love that you're aware of and navigating literally and flowing with superstitions and things we've grown up with and things that can still influence our life day to day. I wanted to chat about, there's so many different stories and different forms. Olga plays with the structure, the punctuation, the length. There's a couple of stories that are like a sentence or two sentences. It's really, really neat. And I was trying to figure out my favorite story. The first time I read it, it was one, and I decided it's a different one this time. But what is your favorite story, and why?
Yeah, I had fun with a lot of them. With most of them, and some were like took a lot of days of fun and frustration, and some were fast. But I wanted to. I think that there's two I wanted to highlight. I think is Dandelion is one. I think it speaks to a lot of writers. It speaks to a lot of writers because it imagines a novel. What if a novel were like a child, or but in the reverse, right? What if a child is like a novel, and then the protagonist sends a child to be published in New York, it's a short story, but I had a lot of fun with it, and it was just. I was like, ooh, I think I can do this, and I tried it, and it worked, and it was a great moment of writing. And then I titled the story like Water and Other, like Water, based on the title of the piece that I think is central for the book. It's the penultimate story in the collection, comes late in the book because I think it's. I think of this book as a number of braided themes, braided stories, and I'm not opposed to thinking it's a kind of a novel, just because I think a lot of the characters struggle with a set number of issues, but the story like Water, I deal with I deal with the topic of bisexuality or coming out late in life, understanding sexuality, and specifically again for dealing with the post-Soviet community or former Soviet community, because of all of the things that were silenced in the Soviet Union, sexuality was homosexuality was particularly silenced. Sex was, in general, not a topic of polite conversation, but homosexuality was pretty much completely stricken out of public discourse, and so it is. And so it is, even within the immigrant community in the diaspora here. I think it is. Harder for people who have gone through only first 12 years of my life were the Soviet era, but still I feel like it's difficult to find models within my community for people older than me who I've only recently, and through the work on LGBT topics in the post-Soviet space, I started to actually meet people who were out within their small niche community within the Soviet Union. So like growing up, there was, it was just, it didn't exist. So anyway, so in the story, that's one of the big topics that I deal with, and it's something that continues to be important in my work, and my current work in progress also touches on that topic.
Yes, and I love the blog that you co-run with Yelena Furman. If you haven't had a chance to check out the blog, you feature writers and authors in the post-Soviet space across all kind of intersections. And I want to also say post-Soviet space, both people who are of there, but also people whose lives took them there, who lived there, who worked there for one reason or another. And you explore all kinds of intersectionalities, including sexuality and LGBTQ issues, which is just so interesting and broadens the conversation.
Yeah, it's been a great project, and actually the project came out from my book, like after I published, after the book came out in 2019, and the pandemic happened, and a lot of my book events went on Twitter. Like Twitter then became like the primary way of talking about my work, or spreading the word. And I met Yelena Furman, who teaches at UCLA, through Twitter, and we ended up actually no, I met her before my timelines get a little confused, but anyway, we started the blog because we felt like in the US the conversation about Russian lit is vastly dominated by a few male names, and unfortunately there's very few books that are published in translation from Russian, but there are female voices, really important female voices, and very important voices that are not from Russia, or not from Russia proper, that are written in Russian or translated from Russian, or people who write about former Soviet space in the US or outside of Eastern Europe, but in US, Israel, Germany, other places in the world that complicate our understanding of the former Soviet space, and that they need more support. That we needed to amplify those voices, and one of my interests was also books published by LGBT writers, which this is another developing a very, very sad story, because at the time there were a lot of LGBT books being published in Russia proper. There's a lot of authors. There's critics who were focusing in it. There were magazines dedicated to the culture and the literature of the burgeoning queer community. And now it's all basically done again underground. And the activists are being targeted and prosecuted. So, but that being said, there's a lot of really interesting writers and voices. So, and I should say this too. I don't know the Ukrainian LGBT literature as well as I know Russian, but there are some similar issues that existed in contemporary Ukraine, or contemporary other post-Soviet spaces. Ukraine is not alone, Belarus, Moldova. Estonia was the first country this summer to legalize gay marriage in the post-Soviet space, the first and the only so far. So, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for making visible and bringing the writers. I know that you are actively connecting with people who are there, who are in Eastern Europe, and trying to amplify their voices as they're writing currently. So thank you for that work. I want to get back a little bit to your prose and ask you about influences on your writing.
Yeah, so many, but it's this is the part where it's I find myself being a very bicultural writer. So and my loyalties are both here and there, I think, yeah, by doing Punctured Lines, I started to realize how much some of what I do is still influenced by the writers I read when I was young. And so one writer that I like to talk about is Yelena Furman, who's known here as for her collection of like the woman who won something through her neighbor's baby. I forget the English title, but right, it's a long title. But she had been writing from the 60s on, but only started to get published in the Soviet Union in the 80s with these stories that are very she has her own genre. It's called Chernucha. It's like they're so ultra like realistic that like they depicted the street life, the drunks, the alcoholics, the street workers, the unsavory conditions of the Soviet apartments, the squabbles between families and children living together in tight quarters, and which is what made her unpublishable during the Soviet era, because it went against the social realism mandate to publish fiction about the Soviet Union. She fictionalized in a different way by portraying some of the truths of the everyday life, and the women's lives as well. And she really centered the women's lives, and she has her own way of writing, and she's in her 80s now, and she just published a piece about basically like she said she stopped, she's not gonna write anymore because it's no use in trying to tell the truth to Russians about themselves, because they're irredeemable.
Wow. Yeah. Let's see, how are we doing? I might have time for both of these questions. Okay. All right. You have a beautiful artist statement in the beginning of the book, and I wanted to ask you about it. I know you must have written it, or I guess you must have written it quite a while back. So I'm curious how it rings for you now. Let me start with this part. So you talked about the bicultural identity. So you write, in the process of maintaining a dual bicultural identity, the artist never fully adapts, never fully belongs, never stops becoming. She keeps growing alongside her children. So I'm curious how that sits with you today. Are you still connected to your sense of your identity in a same way? You have written, and this has been published, you have a new novel, your children are older. How do you connect to your identity today?
Great question. And there are many ways in which I can answer this question. I mean, one of the ways is through, like, again, addressing the issues with the ever-changing former Soviet identity. We talk about this a lot. With you and other writers who share some of the similar background, growing up in the Soviet Union, coming here at a young age or older in life, but how do we identify? We came from different parts of the Soviet Union. Now they're different countries, but they were the same country then, and we share a lot of the, a lot of us are Jewish, though not all. So we share Jewish culture, but what other culture? Like, how do we define that culture? What do we call it? And this keeps changing. The Russia's attack on Ukraine just, made it extra hard to find a joint way to even put a word that even a lot, people start to have difficulty. I mean, it's uncomfortable to even say former Soviet Union because that was now like 2 generations ago. It feels really of a different era. So anyway, so that's one way. And another way is, and I keep thinking about this, how like couple. I mean, this part of it. This is one part of it. The other part is parenting, which is also a big part of the book. I don't feel like, I feel like it took me like many years to comfortably identify as a parent, and I feel like I still continue to learn from the environment and what that even means to be a parent, because again, the expectations of parenthood and parenting are so different culturally and different from where you are in the world. So when you travel, you notice that, when you live far away from where you grew up, I guess, I have to reconnect. It's not. I don't recognize myself in the things I say and do sometimes. I don't know if that's clear. So.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, I'm just aware of how complicated and nuanced all of this is, and juggling the multiple identities and cultures is. You do that so beautifully in the stories. I think, what I really appreciate is I feel like you weave these threads and you sort of place it. And then as a reader, I'm looking at it, and it's not a simplified version. I feel like you kind of put the reality there through the way that you build the different narratives. And then one sits with it as a reader, and you keep it in its complex form. You keep it in its nuanced form. So on the topic of the writing, this is also actually part of your artist statement. You also say, typically we think of published stories as finished, but as most writers know, a finished story is a kind of fiction. I love that. I really love that. How do you know when to let it go and send the dandelion child out into the world, or an individual story to just stop tinkering with it?
This is where you have to have rules for yourself, or you have to. I feel like every writer has to have workarounds around this. For me, my process involves, I get to a draft, I get to the end of the draft, and then I send it to trusted readers. So this is where I got to the point where to which I got with my current work in progress. I finished the draft and I sent it to a few readers, and I got some feedback. And then then it depends. Like if the feedback that comes back gives you ideas, gives me ideas, like, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can make this change, and I can see how this can improve this story. Then I do another pass, and then and sometimes the feedback comes back, and I just I see the point, this is good feedback, but I don't know how to address this particular issue. So I was like, well, I send it out. Often when you send the same story to a number of different readers, you get a range of responses. And I trust the universe too a little bit, that each story is looking for its editor, its reader, and sometimes I find that the best editors are the people who give you the best suggestions, like the suggestions that you can that resonate the closest, are the people who really get it, the people with whom the work really lands well. So you're looking for people who say, "Oh, I love this. This is me." Like and then you read on and you say, "Oh, but this is something that you can do." So, but yeah, that's. And then sometimes you just have to set yourself arbitrary deadlines. On January 1st, I'm sending this out to 10 magazines or 10 agents, and just do it.
Roll the dandelion.
It's interesting, the process you just described almost feels collaborative in the sense of like a bit of co-creation, right? The readers that need to receive it, and then possibly push you, right? That's the feedback that's really brave. To me, it resonates as very brave, because I'm always unsure, like, is this right to send out and solicit feedback at this point, or is it not ready yet? So I think just knowing that, all right, I'm gonna send Dandelion out.
I mean, it's people I think vary between people who are ready to, my first draft is brilliant and I'm gonna send it out, and people who can tinker for years, and and it's I guess I do believe that it is important to send out and get the feedback, and then the feedback helps you to understand better what it is that you're trying to say.
I love that you brought up your current work in progress. Olga talks about it very modestly. I think it's finished. I had the privilege to read the new book, and it was really powerful, really cathartic, to a lot of, you're going to say more about it, but it deals a lot with immigration and sort of thinking about immigration. And it was very cathartic for me to read and come across. Would it be okay if I read the byline, and then I think you're going to treat us to an excerpt? Okay, let's see. So the current title is Don't Shut the Door. And Don't Shut the Door, the new book, follows Rita, a teenage girl, as she confronts her parents' agonizing decision to immigrate to the United States in 1990. So I have more to say, but I know you're going to say a few words and then read something.
Yeah, and this this book came out of several different complementary impulses. The first is something that was with me since I was a teen growing up in the Soviet Union in Russia, when Soviet Union was falling apart. And I was 12 in 91, and I started taking notes even then. I was so aware of living through something historic. I felt like, oh, I have to document this. And I had a lot of cutouts, newspaper cutouts. I was a subscriber to this newspaper for teens, and I have these 2 thick notebooks of newspaper cutouts from the era that I used. And then the other direction that's very different, but also that I found related, is the conversations on Twitter and other social media that were happening during the COVID era and before and after, I guess, just about trying to find that there's quite a lot of diaspora writers where all the diaspora writers, like there's a group of older New York writers like Gary Steingart and Lara Vapnyar and like a few other people, and a number of other people, but there's a lot of us who experienced the very tail end of the Soviet Union, and a lot of people who came here as children. And I was not a child, so I was 17 when I came to the US, and I came here for college, but I was in that in-between state where I felt like when I came here, it wasn't my own decision, it was my family's decision. And so I very much relate to the stories of the people who came here as children, it was absolutely not their decision, and but they have to deal with the repercussions of this decision. And as an older teen, I very much, even at the same time, like at the time when I got here, I remember everyone in college was asking me, why did you choose to come to the United States? And I responded with anger. I didn't choose. It was very frustrating that people didn't understand and kept asking me this question. I'm still 17. What could I have possibly chosen? But my personal experience is sort of, it's in between and it's too unique. So my protagonist, so I combine those two threads, and my protagonist is 13-year-old. She's a younger teen. She's definitely not in control of her life. And her parents decide to immigrate during this very strange and interesting time. And I'm going to read a short excerpt from the beginning. It's not the very beginning, but it's very close to the beginning. And it's the end of the summer season 1990, and Rita is coming back to Leningrad after 3 months in the remote countryside, and she's preparing to start 8th grade in a few days. All through the hike to the station, the train ride, and the subway ride, I had a feeling that Mama was watching me, waiting for something. I watched her too, trying to understand what she was thinking. She attempted to start the conversation several times, but both the train and the subway were crowded, and she didn't want to be overheard. She waited until we were almost home. "How you've grown," she said, soon after we stepped onto the escalator, about to exit the subway. She took my head by the chin and turned it toward herself. This felt weird, and I jerked my head away. "Don't deny me this pleasure," she said, holding on to my face. "Your hair is getting bushy. I dare anyone to say that your nose is too big. Once we pull your hair back, you look just like Cleopatra, except you're too pale. I wish we could have gone to the Black Sea. Children need sunshine, and this summer you didn't get any." She sighed. "It's not the looks that count," I muttered, relieved that we were finally coming to the end of the escalator. She had to let go of my head. I hated the way her words made me feel like a showpiece in a museum. I wanted to escape the comparison with others. Was my nose too straight or not straight enough? I didn't want to think about it. Was this really the thing she'd been gathering courage to tell me? You're talented too, Mama said, misunderstanding me. It wouldn't hurt a girl to take an interest in art and literature, but perhaps that will come later. Mama, stop, please. You'll be 14 in January. It's time for you to stop acting like a child, Rita, and to look at yourself objectively, Mama said, turning around to step off the escalator. We exited the station building, and I was instantly plunged into the middle of the city life. In the gathering dusk, Prospect Spacek was as busy as ever, 6 lanes of traffic illuminated by the headlights of cars streaming to and from downtown. Across the street, the chimneys of the Kirovsky factory spewed pale smoke into the dark, overcast sky. To the left, the small park in front of the Dom Kultury was a welcome spot of greenery. Its trees and shrubs had not been shorn in a while and had spread their branches far above the electric poles as though hugging them and trying to return their wood to its natural state. I breathed in the familiar scent of subway ventilators, a dizzying mix of machine oil and burnt rubber. And as I did so, I felt a tingle of anticipation, a happiness waiting ahead just for me. It felt so close I could reach for it and grab it. When would something extraordinary finally happen to me? Mama was already halfway down the stairs, and I rushed to catch up with her. It was warmer in this part of the city than it had been in the countryside, and the air had a metallic tinge to it. It wasn't truly warm, but under the weight of the backpack, my body filmed over with sweat. As we got down the stairs and walked toward the park, I saw that despite all the recent rains, the aspens and lindens looked dry, leaves brown at the edges, and the acacia shrubs shriveled, unhealthy. The grass, thick in places, was trampled over and covered with mud and fallen leaves and peppered with cigarette butts, bits of newspaper, all products of human labor discarded at the very time and place where things lost their usefulness. As we walked by a bus stop, I noticed that the newspaper boards hadn't been updated since the past spring, and the pages had crumpled and yellowed over the weeks. Behind them, a group of people was gathered around a man with a guitar, picking the strings, trying to work up a melody. "Don't look," Mama said, and she increased the pace. But it was too late. I was already seeing a man open the fly of his trousers to urinate under a tree near the sidewalk without any care for privacy. A hideous, shapeless thing dangled between his legs, and though I averted my eyes, I couldn't shake off the image. I felt soiled, as though I just stepped in dog shit. "There are going to be some changes at your school," Mama said, so matter-of-factly that at first I didn't think that this was the conversation she'd been preparing for. Or was this an opening for bigger news to come?
Stay tuned for this book. You have to get your hands on it as soon as it comes out. We're going to now open it to Q&A. So if you are ready, and I'll pass the mic.
Would you like the mic?
Yeah. Oh, I just looked behind. Hi, Olga. I really love the space that you're creating with your writing. And I was curious if you would comment on the electric landscape that helps to visualize the emotional load in the story. There's something very special about the space and time in your stories that I'd love to hear a little bit about.
Well, the landscape is always so interesting, and writing in English, I'm always aware of the existence of a certain image of Russia within the English-speaking sphere, there's specifically with St. Petersburg, when I deal with St. Petersburg, and I don't often actually set stories in St. Petersburg because a lot of people have this image of the imperial center, imperial city, the imperial downtown of it, which is, it's there. It's especially there 2 months a year when the weather is sort of nice. But I grew up, where I think most people grew up. I mean, some people do live in the historical center, but the far more, commonplace is the Soviet-built housing blocks, and that could be almost anywhere in the Soviet Union with some quite large variation. But so with this novel, like with the new novel, I'm trying to also I'm creating St. Petersburg, and very intentionally, I have a scene where my characters take the subway under the historic downtown. I think it's but it is it's tricky because I want to make the imperial city is also there, and it's sort of unavoidable. You have to deal with it somehow, but it creates a challenge.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm so happy to see you after such a long time, and I've always loved reading your stories. And I think it's such a pleasure to hear from your new work. So I think there's something that I'm struggling with, especially because I'm also trying to write about similar memories like yours. So I'm wondering just the act of forgetting itself has its own complex sort of ramification, because half the time when you're trying to re-remember things, it's also that's just how time passes, right? There's also the whole political landscape, and you want to be faithful to how you first reimagined it, or it was not an imagination. It's just that when we think about the historical past, at that point it's very difficult to really understand that you're living through a very momentous moment. It's only in retrospect that you kind of tend to think about it. So I'm just wondering, on one hand, how do you sort of navigate this complexity, and then on the other hand, also thinking about really difficult things. And I know that you do write about really dark things that would repress, but there's also this very, very personal act of re-remembering, because you have to just write about it, but then also not fall into the trap of invoking trauma, as a way of perpetuating it, but just to sometimes I think as writers we do our own therapy while writing, because it's really I can't afford therapy, so it's really how I write. So I'm just wondering just how do you navigate this kind of things?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's such a big cultural shift with this, or cultural break maybe, in that whole, there's a trope that you hear in old school writing workshops or writing advice books that writing isn't therapy, and you have to forget your own personal traumas and just do what serves the story, whatever that means. But I sometimes find that, what serves the story, when people use that language, what serves the story is usually the plots that people expect, the familiar plots, right? Then when you're trying to amplify a situation, or trying to give the character a bigger problem to deal with, it's usually something regurgitated. It's something that comes from other media. You know, we're doing this AI kind of thing where, we borrow other people's traumas, right? Because our own don't seem to be significant enough, right? So, and it's and yes, a lot of people go through terrible things, but I do try to, to reflect the things that I feel like I have a limit of what I can truthfully represent on paper. I haven't seen anybody murdered. I'm not gonna try to write about that. That's not something that, again, I feel like if I were to do that, I would learn how to do that from other people's writing, and I would replicate a story that's already out there and probably that has been done better than I could. So I do rely on memory a lot, but here's the question, right? As you said, right, like memories change, or the thing that I wanted to write when I was 12 is not what this book is, right? I did have a romance that I wanted to immortalize at the time. This was not it, and it was hard, and it took me many years to figure out how to write about that time and what it is that was drawing me back there, because there are certain things that have that do draw me back to that era, besides my own teenage problems, and what I ended up with is the idea of a really fast, really large shift in culture, and even trying to remember, like this experience of excavating what the Soviet Union was like on the brink of its destruction or its disappearance, was actually proved to be really hard, and especially it's hard to do with this very particular school groups, like the school ecosystem. So much of it depended on the Communist Party, and that disappeared overnight. And it took me a really long time to even, understand how and why and how the systems of relationships were affected by it. Why some kids were popular and why some kids weren't popular. In fact, actually also had to do with the Communist Party to a degree. So anyway, it's, yeah. So that was an interesting exercise.
Awesome. Okay, last question.
Hi, and I was somewhat curious about the new book, since you're describing it sort of as a quick change in culture. So I'm sort of wondering, maybe two things. One, if there was just a culture that was very different for just a couple of years of people figuring out what it was like without the communists, without knowing what confusing things was going on, and if there was a sort of brief culture there. I'm also most curious the way you talk about it, if you're familiar with the movie The Wave, and I'm almost imagining a reverse case of that, but I don't know if that's completely off.
I mean, so my book, with the book I don't write, but the book is very set in a very specific, very short moment, but I mean, I feel like, the change in culture happened really quickly and also not quickly enough. Like, so for example, so yeah, I grew up in a Jewish family, and with my parents' generation, my parents, and within the Soviet Union, a lot of people know about this, right? That there was a state-sanctioned anti-Semitism, and so a lot of people within even my mom, my parents, my aunt couldn't go to universities that they wanted to go because of admissions caps and all of that. And so that started to change really rapidly when Jews started to be able to emigrate, and it changed even quicker in the 90s. But the system was regulated not on official levels, but by a certain by a system, by an unofficial system, and that system got transferred into money. So it was no longer. So when I was applying for college, I was not limited by what was written in my passport as my nationality, which was Jewish, but it was limited by who my parents knew and how much money they had to pay the admissions officers. So but it created a really different system of values. I'll stop with system of values.
Okay, I had a request for one more comment.
Because I had so many comments and questions, but we're running out of time. And many things here resonated with me because I'm from the Balkans, which are kind of close to the post-Soviet space, but not, anyway, many themes. But in the book, like Water, when you were talking about the favorite stories, my favorite one is An Ex for Sale, at least at the moment. And I think many people might like it because it's about a very strong mother at very difficult times. So I think Olga writes about parenting so well, even though I see it was a struggle, but I'm really glad the new book involves the family, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot from the parents as well as from the kids, so they'll looking forward to it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all so much for being here.
We have a question from the audience. To buy your book through Venmo, think the last 4 digits of your phone number.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so we're about to transition, and then Olga, maybe you could add it to the flyer. So yeah, we're about to do that. I also just want to thank again Cynthia and Palo Alto Library. Thank you so much for hosting us. Thank you for being an amazing audience. Thank you, everyone. So pleasant and so engaged and excellent questions. We are going to be sticking around, and you're welcome to chat with us until about 8 o'clock. Definitely, if you do not have a copy of Like Water and Other Stories, pick it up, because talking about stories and actually immersing yourself in the story, two different experiences, and they're beautiful. And I also just want to mention, you'll see a flyer that has Inspiring Multicultural Understanding on that. It's an organization I've been connected with for the last 15 years, and the work that we do intersects with a lot of things that we've been talking about and that Olga writes about. These are programs for recent immigrant and refugee teens in San Francisco to help them navigate real life today. And find their voice and tell their stories. So I'm happy to talk more about that, and you'll see information around about that as well. Thank you so much.